Imagine the power goes out tonight. No lights, no stove, no heater, no phone charger. Within minutes, your home begins to feel different. The darkness grows heavier. Every sound outside becomes louder. You instinctively reach for light, for warmth, for something familiar. Now imagine there is no flashlight, no electricity, no matches, no lighter, no memory that fire has ever existed. For nearly 7 million years, your ancestors lived exactly like that. And here's the strange part. If ancient humans had never learned to control fire, there's a good chance you wouldn't be here to imagine this at all. Not because fire made life more comfortable, because it may have made us human. By the end of this story, you may never look at a campfire, a candle, or even your kitchen stove the same way again. It is easy to think of fire as just another invention, like the wheel, or farming, something humans created after they had already become intelligent. But archaeology tells a very different story. In 1988, archaeologists working inside Wonderwork Cave in South Africa uncovered something extraordinary. Buried nearly 2 meters beneath the cave floor were tiny fragments of burned bone and ash. At first, they looked insignificant, but microscopic analysis showed the materials had not been carried in by a wildfire. They had burned exactly where they were found. The evidence was later dated to around 1 million years ago. That discovery pushed controlled fire back hundreds of thousands of years earlier than many researchers expected. Long before cities, long before writing, long before modern humans even existed. The likely owner of that fire wasn't you. It was probably Homo erectus, a human ancestor with a smaller brain, a heavier skeleton, and a body built for walking enormous distances across Africa. For decades, scientists pictured Homo erectus as a simple scavenger. But fire forced them to rethink everything. Because controlling fire isn't the same as finding it. Lightning had always started wildfires. Volcanoes had always thrown burning lava across landscapes. Nature already knew how to make fire. The difficult part was keeping it alive. Imagine discovering flames after a lightning strike. The fire burns for hours before fading into glowing embers. Now your survival depends on those embers. You have no matches, no way to create another flame. Every hour someone must feed it. Every night someone must guard it. Every journey means carrying glowing coals wrapped inside bark, dried fungus, or hollow wood. If the fire dies, you don't simply lose warmth. You lose your greatest technology. For many early human groups, making fire from scratch may have been impossible. Instead, they likely transported it for weeks or even months. Some anthropologists even describe ancient fire as something closer to a living companion than a tool. It demanded constant attention. Neglect it for one night, and an entire group could lose something that took months to replace. But here's where the story becomes even stranger. Keeping fire alive wasn't the biggest advantage it gave our ancestors. Cooking was. Today, cooking feels ordinary. You boil water without thinking. You bake bread. You fry eggs. But almost every calorie you eat has already been transformed by heat. Around the early 2000s, British primatologist Richard Wrangham proposed one of the most controversial ideas in evolutionary biology. He argued that cooking didn't simply improve human life. It changed human evolution itself. His argument began with a simple observation. Compare humans with chimpanzees. Chimpanzees spend roughly 5 to 7 hours every day chewing raw food. Leaves, roots, fruit, raw meat. Their powerful jaws and enormous molars do most of the work. Humans don't. Our teeth are surprisingly small. Our jaws are weak. Compared to other primates, they're almost fragile, which raises an uncomfortable question. Why would evolution make eating harder? Wrangham believed it didn't. Cooking had already done the hard work. Heat softens meat, breaks down plant fibers, gelatinizes starch, destroys many harmful bacteria and parasites. The same food suddenly delivers more usable calories while demanding far less chewing. That matters because your brain is astonishingly expensive. Although it represents only about 2% of your body weight, it consumes roughly 20% of your body's resting energy. No other great ape invests so much energy into thinking. Without an enormous and reliable calorie supply, that brain becomes impossible to maintain. Cooking may have supplied exactly that. In other words, your ancestors may not have become smart enough to control fire. They may have become smart because they learned to cook with it. It's a radical reversal of what most people assume. Except there was a problem. Not every scientist agrees that cooking alone explains the rise of the human brain. Some argue that increased meat consumption came first. Others point towards social cooperation, climate change, or improved hunting strategies. And then archaeologists uncovered evidence that complicated the story even further. Because the oldest controlled fires don't perfectly match the timeline of rapidly expanding human brains, something wasn't adding up. The relationship between fire and intelligence turned out to be far more mysterious than anyone expected. The timeline of human evolution should have been simple. Larger brains appeared. Fire appeared. Cooking followed. Case closed. But the fossil record refused to cooperate. By around 1.8 million years ago, Homo erectus already had a brain significantly larger than earlier human ancestors. Fossils from Cubifora in Kenya and Dmanisi in Georgia show a species that looked remarkably human from the neck down. They walked efficiently. They traveled vast distances. They had spread out of Africa long before any undeniable evidence of regular fire. If they weren't consistently using fire yet, what fueled those growing brains? Some researchers believe the answer began with meat. At sites like Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, archaeologists have uncovered stone tools dating back nearly 2 million years, alongside animal bones marked with precise cut marks. These weren't random scratches left by predators. They matched the edges of sharpened stone flakes. Someone had butchered these animals. Even raw meat contains far more concentrated energy than leaves or roots. It also provides fats that are critical for building and maintaining nervous tissue. For years, this became dominant explanation. Eat more meat. Grow a bigger brain. Simple. But there was another problem. Raw meat is hard to digest. It takes time to chew. It carries dangerous parasites, bacteria. And chewing itself has limits. Modern experiments have shown that raw diets require significantly more chewing than cooked ones. Some anthropologists estimate that cooking reduces chewing time by millions of jaw movements every year. That sounds trivial, until you realize evolution notices even small advantages over hundreds of thousands of years, which means meat alone probably wasn't enough. Fire transformed meat into something entirely different. But here's where it gets stranger. Fire didn't just change food. It changed time. Before fire, your day ended when sun disappeared. For most mammals, darkness means inactivity. Vision becomes unreliable. Predators gain the advantage. Energy must be conserved. Then came fire. For the first time in evolutionary history, humans could push back night. In 2014, anthropologist Polly Wiesner spent years studying the Jew/Hoansi, hunter-gatherers living in the Kalahari Desert of southern Africa. During daylight hours, conversations focused almost entirely on practical survival. Where to hunt, where to gather food, who would travel tomorrow, how to repair tools. 80% of daytime conversations revolved around immediate economic tasks. But after sunset, everything changed. As families gathered around the fire, practical discussions faded. People began telling stories. They talked about distant places, shared myths, remembered ancestors, discussed relationships, laughed together, imagined things that weren't physically present. Fire didn't just create light. It created hours that had never truly existed before. Hours for imagination, hours for teaching, hours for culture. Without fire, your ancestors may have survived, but they would have had far fewer opportunities to pass complex knowledge from one generation to the next. Imagine trying to explain how to hunt a mammoth, or identify poisonous plants, or recognize dangerous weather. In total darkness, every evening around the fire became a classroom. Knowledge accumulated instead of disappearing. Culture became something that could grow. But there was another advantage almost no one thinks about. Sleep. Today, locking your door feels normal. 20,000 years ago, nothing stood between your family and the wilderness except darkness. That darkness belonged to predators. During the late Pleistocene, humans shared landscapes with cave lions, hyenas, wolves, and massive bears across Europe and Asia. Many hunted primarily at night. Excavation sites like Shanidar Cave in Iraq and Chauvet Cave in France show repeated use of fire inside caves occupied by humans. The flames produced more than warmth. Smoke, light, movement. Most predators instinctively avoid active fire. A burning hearth effectively created one of humanity's first security systems. No walls, no gates, just controlled flames. Without that protection, sleeping would have become a completely different experience. Instead of one group resting through the night, someone might always need to stay awake, watching, listening, waiting for glowing eyes beyond the darkness. One exhausted night after another. Fire gave humans something almost impossible to measure: uninterrupted sleep. Modern neuroscience shows why that mattered. During deep sleep, your brain strengthens memories, repairs neural connections, and processes everything you learned during the day. Poor sleep doesn't just make you tired. It weakens decision-making, slows learning, reduces creativity. A safer night's sleep may have quietly accelerated human intelligence over thousands of generations. But perhaps the biggest change happened before anyone fell asleep. People stayed together. Before controlled fire, there was little reason to gather after sunset. Darkness naturally separated individuals. After fire, everyone was drawn toward the same glowing center. Adults, children, hunters. Every night became a social event. Anthropologists sometimes call the hearth the first human living room. It wasn't built from stone. It was built from shared attention. The fire became the center of the group. Around it, language may have become richer. Children learned simply by listening. Elders remained valuable long after they could no longer hunt. Memory became as important as strength. A grandma who remembered where water could still be found during droughts might save an entire band decades after her last successful hunt. Knowledge had finally found a stage. But all of this depends on one fragile assumption: that humans could actually keep fire alive. Because if the flames disappeared, everything disappeared with them. And evidence suggests that may have happened far more often than we imagine. Imagine waking before sunrise. The ashes are cold. You dig deeper with a stick, hoping to find a single glowing ember. Nothing. The fire is gone. There is no lighter hidden in your pocket. No dry match waiting in a box. No guarantee another lightning storm will happen this season. For an early human group, this wasn't an inconvenience. It could become a survival crisis. Some anthropologists believe that before humans reliably learned to create fire, many groups depended on preserving it instead. They may have carried smoldering coals wrapped in slow-burning materials like dry fungus or rotten wood, feeding them carefully during long journeys. A fire wasn't something you made. It was something you inherited. An inheritance can be lost. This may explain why archaeologists don't find evidence of controlled fire at every prehistoric site. Some groups probably had it. Others may have lost it. Some may have gone months, or even years, without access to a dependable flame. Human history was never a straight line. Knowledge appeared. Knowledge disappeared. Then it appeared again. That pattern repeats throughout prehistory. Stone tool traditions emerged, spread across continents, and sometimes vanished for thousands of years. Different populations solved the same problems in different ways, often without ever meeting one another. Fire may have followed the same path, but eventually something changed. By around 400,000 years ago, evidence of regular fire use begins appearing across multiple regions. At Cohesion Cave in present-day Israel, archaeologists uncovered a large central hearth surrounded by layers of burned bones and stone tools. The cave was occupied repeatedly for nearly 200,000 years. The fire wasn't random. It sat in the center. People organized their lives around it. They butchered animals nearby, cooked food, repaired tools, returned again and again to the same glowing place. The hearth had become more than a source of heat. It had become the center of society. Around the same time, similar evidence appears in Europe. At Beech's Pit in England, dating to roughly 400,000 years ago, archaeologists discovered distinct fireplaces containing burned flint and ash. These weren't isolated accidents. They suggest that different human populations, separated by hundreds of kilometers, had mastered the same technology. Fire was no longer a rare advantage. It was becoming part of what it meant to be human. And that transformation reached far beyond survival. Fire reshaped the human body. Cooking reduced the need for massive teeth and powerful chewing muscles. Over hundreds of thousands of years, human jaws became smaller. Our faces became flatter. Some researchers argue that these changes even created more room for the complex vocal tract used in speech. Fire reshaped the human day. Instead of ending at sunset, life stretched into the night. Stories, planning, teaching, and cooperation could continue for hours after darkness fell. Fire reshaped the human map. Cold valleys that once seemed impossible became livable. Ice Age Europe, with its freezing winters, could now support human groups carrying warmth with them. Migration accelerated. New landscapes became reachable, and fire reshaped the human mind. Not because flames magically made people intelligent, but because they created the conditions where intelligence could grow. More calories, safer sleep, longer conversations, stronger communities. Generation after generation, those small advantages accumulated. Evolution rarely works through dramatic leaps. It works through tiny improvements repeated over unimaginable spans of time. That's why the question isn't simply, what if ancient humans never discovered fire? The better question is, would we still recognize ourselves if they hadn't? Your ancestors might still have survived. They might still have hunted, still gathered fruit, still crossed rivers, still raised children, but they likely would have remained bound to daylight, vulnerable to cold, limited by raw food, and isolated by the darkness. The chain leading to modern humanity would have looked very different. Every meal you cook, every light you switch on, every conversation that continues late into the evening, every winter night spent warm inside your home. Each of those ordinary moments traces back to a decision made hundreds of thousands of years ago, not to invent fire, but to refuse to let it die. And perhaps that's the strangest part. The first technology that changed humanity wasn't made of stone or metal. It was a fragile flame, passed from one generation to the next. For nearly 1,000,000 years, your ancestors protected it with their lives. Because long before fire illuminated the world, it illuminated the future of the human species.